Nobody cares about Addie or Sam outside of learning and development. If you're going to go into a leadership meeting,
Welcome to the TroopHR podcast. I'm your host, Taylor Bradley. If that hot take at the beginning made you bristle with indignation, start slow clapping, or react anywhere in between, this episode is just for you. Today, we're diving deep into driving impact through L&D with Rory Sacks, Global Learning and Development Lead at StubHub. With Rory's expertise on hand, we will cover what L&D really means for your organization, how to drive impact with or without a budget, and hot takes on the future of workplace learning. Rory doesn't hold back, offering one of the most practical and honest accounts of L&D's role in an organization that I have heard. With so much ground to cover, I first asked Rory, what should learning and development mean to an organization? Perhaps it's just a necessary cost, or it's a strategic investment for long-term success. Let's turn it over to Rory to find out more.
what learning and development should be for organizations is the development of not just skills, but of people, and then talent development from that as well, which is how can we ensure that our business can stay resilient when or if tough times are ahead. And I look at learning and development from that lens. How are we building resiliency within our organization?
I have actually never heard a talent development leader talk about resiliency as one of the key traits, but it is such an important trait
Mhm.
that we've all noticed in organizations, particularly over the past 5 years.
Mhm.
My goodness, how
Oh,
much
yeah.
change, adapting needed to take place. How did you come to that? How did you come to the point of resiliency should be a key trait?
I've spent a lot of my career working in startups and in tech. I've been fortunate enough to both work for universities, large organizations, and tech startups. And the one thing that I've noticed a lot with the tech companies is every time an organization goes through a challenge, could be macro, microeconomic, whatever that is, the business leaders always decide that a change needs to be made. And that's usually a turnover of headcount. We need new things. We're pivoting. We're doing all these things that require new people. And from a learning and development perspective and an HR perspective, I've always looked at it like, well, that's supposed to be our role, is to ensure that these people that we've hired at whatever point, because the business needed them then, they're in theory superstars, right? Like, we pride ourselves on hiring the best talent out there. And if that's the case, then they should be able to grow. And seeing the constant overturn of individuals just to bring in new people with new skills led me to the belief that learning and development, talent development, we need to focus on resiliency so that we don't have to spend time, money, or energy retraining individuals when they come into the organization, because onboarding is very costly. So what can we do to increase this organizational resiliency with the talent that we already have, so that if we do have to go back out into the market, we only have to find a couple of key individuals rather than rebuild whole teams?
And starting with onboarding,
Mhm.
when we think about onboarding, if we have many of our listeners do not have L&D teams, they don't have talent development teams built out or
Mhm.
have the budget for that.
Mhm.
What are some of the things that they should be thinking about designing, building, and measuring against from an onboarding lens?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was just talking about onboarding this morning, because it's always in the L&D toolkit. How are you looking at it? How are we evaluating it? So I like to separate onboarding, especially for small companies. If you're a team of one or just a very small team, there's orientation and then there's onboarding. So I like to look at orientation as welcoming individuals into the business, our culture, our values, all that stuff. And as a small HR team, that's easy to handle, right? And you can dump onboarding off onto the functions or the managers, right? Welcome to the team. This is what we do here. These are our team goals. This is how you're going to reach them. And so by delineating that, especially early on, it helps a greater HR team in L&D focus, right? Like we are only helping individuals with orientation. It helps us be really innovative because we don't have to have this super broad lens that we need to encompass. Once we get orientation at the right point where the feedback that we're getting is, I feel ready to make an impact in the business. I feel welcome. You tick all those boxes, then you can start expanding out into the onboarding aspect by partnering with each one of the businesses to say, okay, we know you've been handling onboarding yourself. Where can we help?
And partnering with the SMEs or with the business, to me, is an exceptionally important part
Mhm.
of building any L&D structure. When it comes to measuring the success of your onboarding programs, what types of metrics, I recognize those may be different for each business, but what types of metrics should folks be looking at?
Yeah. So we're looking at, are they making an impact to the business? So you're going to talk to leadership and identify, what does that look like, right? If we're going to ramp people at 90 days or at 180 days, what does that look like that somebody's making an impact on the business, right? You're going to partner with them, and it may be different for each business unit, and that's totally fine. You're going to catalog that and you're going to measure against that. You're going to look at attrition rates over time. You're going to look at promotion, right? Are people getting promoted within a certain domain or a certain business unit very quickly? Is their onboarding just crushing it and they're able to ramp? Like really figuring out what that's about. You're going to look at, are people giving more referrals? So you're going to talk to talent team. Hey, we're getting this many more referrals than we were before. People, we can make the assumption it's correlation, not causation. People like working here. They want their friends and their connections to work here as well. So we're going to cast a really wide net and capture as much data as we can within those first 90 days.
Well said, and shocking that correlation doesn't always equal causation, but looking out for those trends is exceptionally important. I really enjoyed how you divided onboarding really into two segments, that orientation and
Hmm.
onboarding segment. I'd love a hot take from you just for a moment
Yeah.
on the orientation piece.
Hmm.
What areas do you feel that sometimes HR may overcorrect on in the orientation piece and at the expense of maybe some more relevant or critical topics?
Yeah. I think a lot of the times they overcorrect on culture and not enough on business impact. And I don't mean that in a bad way, right? That's our job, is to ensure that the culture of the business is communicated clearly, that people live the values if your organization has one, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, we, especially in onboarding and especially HR, every team really, we're responsible for the growth of the business. And we need to make sure that we're tracking that we really focus in on that when it comes to orientation, that individuals are set up to help the business grow, not just succeed in their own role, not just succeed on the team, but that the business is succeeding because we brought this individual in.
And we've talked about the concept that you just touched on briefly many times in prior episodes, is the employee-employer relationship is symbiotic.
Hmm.
Their success is intrinsically interwoven,
Hmm.
and there's nothing wrong with saying you want to have a well-run, successful business, because if you don't work for a successful business, none of the other
Right.
things matter at that point, right? So it's finding that
Hmm.
balance, and I agree with you. I've sat through a fair number of orientation sessions in my career so far. And I do feel like what has been absent the most has been, how does my work translate into business impact?
Hmm.
So that seems like a fantastic opportunity. I've had a lot of managers over the years come to me and
Hmm.
say, I need X training,
Okay.
whatever it
Yeah.
may be, fill in the blank training.
Yeah.
When you get that statement,
Yep.
There's some questions that you'd like to ask.
First and foremost, learning development, we're not a pizza delivery service. And I try and make that very clear, right? You don't just come to us, tell us what you need, and then we jump, right? It doesn't really work like that. We're performance consultants, like we just said, we're here for the business. And so when a business leader comes to me and says, "Hey, I need this training." Well, why do we need it? Right? Kathy Moore has a really great like chart. It's called Is Training the Answer, which is where we got the name for the podcast. And it helps the instructional designer, the learning development individual, or whoever's really reading this, ask the right questions to identify the cause, the root cause, right? And so once you go through it all and you ask questions like, why are we doing this? Why do you believe that this is happening? Why do you believe that this outcome is happening? What results are you trying to see at the end? How long do you think it should take for those results to start manifesting themselves? Once you go through it, then you can identify where the real problem is. And if you go ahead and you say, well, this is a motivational problem, well, learning isn't going to fix that, right? Like, we're not going to motivate people. That's a manager thing. We need to focus on manager training so that they can appropriately motivate their team and fix whatever challenge is happening here. And so it's really asking the right questions without being pedantic, without telling the business leader that they're wrong, with to find the right root cause. And once we agree on that root cause, then we can focus on the challenge.
Something that you said that really stuck out to me is you don't want to just tell a leader they're wrong. And if I may have a hot take,
Go for it.
throughout my career when working with L&D leaders, one of the things that I've seen not go well is when they get into a room with executive or manager or any stakeholder and they start off the bat talking about the Addy method or some theoretical piece. You
Yeah.
just see eyes glaze over. What advice, and feel free to
Yeah.
have this here too with me, but what advice would you give to L&D leaders when positioning their expertise in a practical way to leaders?
Yeah. So you're right. First of all, nobody cares, right? Nobody cares about Addie or Sam outside of learning and development. If you're going to go into a leadership meeting, first of all, they already think they can do what you do, right? Training is easy. You're just going to stand up there and talk at people with a PowerPoint for 60 minutes. Like, that's their take on what learning and development does. And your only course of action to change their mind is to produce, not correct them, right? And so, one, don't mention Addie, don't mention Sam, don't mention any of the methodologies or the technology or anything like that. These are business leaders. They only care about the business, right? And so what you're going to do is when you sit down with them, you're going to talk about how learning is going to impact the business or how it's going to impact the identified target audience, right? It's all right. Well, we expect to see an increase in, adding things into the Salesforce pipeline by 20%, right? Okay, that I can get on board with. How you do it is irrelevant, just that it needs to get done, right? And so as a leader of L&D or as a leader in HR, that's what the business is trusting you to do, is to be that leader and to go out and do it and just show the data and the success to leadership so that they can continue to trust you to just go out and do what needs to be done.
Well said. And to reiterate to some of our listeners, because this applies to HR as well, a lot of leaders believe that they can do what we can do.
Absolutely.
And sure, anyone can build a career in HR and learn it and those things, but there is expertise, there's
Yep.
nuance that's hidden behind usually the polished outcomes that we help drive. And early on in my career, I feel that maybe I used to take offense to those types of things, in particular when I was at that really early onset phase. But then you just have to adapt to it. And to
Yeah.
your point, just provide the outcome,
That's it.
right? Be known by the impact you're driving, not the process and things that you have. And it brings up another interesting topic is the outputs that you're driving. What are some of the other learning outcomes that you've driven that have been effective, that haven't just been, I'm going to get up in front of you and I'm going to tell you everything in this PowerPoint?
Yeah, developing e-learning and programs, harnessing any sort of external content tool like LinkedIn Learning or Udemy, identifying what technology you can use. And the way I like to put it is as a bionic arm, right? It's not a solution, but it's going to help me do cool things. And that arm can be like switched out for another one. Don't get too in the weeds about the technology that you're using. And that's the right solution. That's the right solution now. And so in my career, it's identifying, especially in the tech space as a team of one, how can I scale what needs to be done as quickly as possible? And that's usually, it needs to be e-learning, but just because it's e-learning doesn't mean it can't be engaging. And so if I'm going to do a live training, well, then there's an e-learning partnership or an e-learning component to it, right? You're going to sit here and be part of an engaging learning experience for 45 minutes or 60 minutes. But after, there are 2 e-learning courses that we want you to take in the learning management system, whatever it is that you call it, right? Making sure that individuals know that we're there to support them, that it's not one and done ever. It's, hey, you did this thing, now do these things. And it should take you the length of time until our next training session. So just always keeping people learning. People talk about it a lot. We want to build a culture of learning. You can't build a culture of learning if people are only learning at certain intervals.
What type of tool could they use if they are working with either a small team
Mhm.
or themselves? And I'd like to categorize it in a way of, if I have no budget, are
Yep.
there free tools that exist? And then if I have budget, which tools do you recommend or types of tools would you recommend?
Yeah. So if you have budget, it's pretty easy. You're going to want to look for a product called Genially. Probably runs you like $80 a year per person. It's super cheap. That will help you build really engaging pseudo e-learning, um, clickable, a lot of data that you can collect. You can embed it anywhere, whether you use Confluence or Notion or whatever it is. If you don't have a learning management system, it's totally fine. You can still embed the content where it needs to be embedded and get reports and data on who completed, who clicked, or whatever. If you want to be a little bit more in depth, you'd go out and get a product like Storyline, which is about $1,300 a user. You're really just going to use Rise, especially if you don't have a really big L&D team. So you're going to create your e-learning that is web-based. And again, it can be put into a web page or a browser, can be embedded. But this is really what you're going to use if you have a learning management system. If you have no budget, you're going to get really creative. You're going to use products like, if you're a Google company, Google Sites, create a learning homepage. If you use SharePoint, your Microsoft, create a SharePoint, and then look for tools like Canva. You're going to create job aids, right? I think that's a completely overlooked opportunity where learning and development can be effective. I think a lot of people, going back to your question about leadership, comes down and says, hey, we need training. Well, no, you need a job aid. Like 80% of the time is you just need a job aid that says, we want you to do A, B, and C, go do these things. So you can use Canva to do that. You can use obviously Google Docs, Word Docs, but if you want to make it pretty, use something like Canva. Other free tools, I'm sure there are a ton that I'm not thinking about. But if you're video heavy, the last thing I'll say is, if you're a video heavy organization, you're going to want to get some sort of video tools like Vimeo or Wistia, any tool that will help you track video watches. You may not see who watches the video, but you will see the length of time that people watch it for. You'll be able to see where they scrub back and forth. Is there a particular 2-minute segment that people are rewatching over and over again? And you'll be able to use that data to make better decisions. So we shouldn't be having 30-minute videos anywhere because people only watch the first 5 minutes. And you can use that data to make data-driven decisions. So ultimately, the money ends up being well spent.
First off, I've just been spending a tremendous amount of time in Articulate Rise
Mhm.
recently. It's a fantastic
Yeah.
tool and super easy to use. Canva especially when I worked at a very small startup and we had no budget, was fantastic. Just the outputs that you can drive with Canva or
Yep.
Canva-like tools,
Yeah.
right? And the other point that you made on the short videos, TikTok, YouTube
Yeah.
Shorts, whatever, Reels on Meta, whatever your favorite, people like short content.
Yeah.
And the one thing that we've been doing has been, and there's probably an official term and I'm misusing this, but a micro learning is
Yeah.
where we dropped in 30, 90-second videos into our Slack channels that are really concentrated on what we want people to recognize about a new process. That's been very effective, especially rolling out new tools like Salesforce or anything like that. It can be really helpful for folks instead of designing a huge course. The other concept that we've had a lot of success with has been the concept of taking like a product development type of approach. And
Hmm.
if you, for our listeners, go back and listen to Jessica Swan's episode, we talk about this process, but coming up with a minimal viable product, not
Hmm.
letting the product become the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
Do you have any other advice for professionals as they're responding to requests?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I like to say perfection is the enemy of progress, right? And so in learning and development, you're constantly always being asked to strive for perfection. Like this course has to go out, it needs to be perfect. No, it needs to be serviceable because we need to get data to suggest, are we even on the right track? Are we communicating the information appropriately? The worst thing that you could do is spend 6 months building a course and then you launch it and people are like, I'm still confused, right? And so if you're going to develop learning, you yourself need to learn, right? You need to learn, how are people consuming content? How long are they staying in it? What is our MVP for our products? And so the way I approach it is I approach it from a business standpoint. And my podcast is Training the Answer. My co-host and I, John, talk a tremendous amount about a bit learning and development being a business within a business. We have a product, which is training. We sell that product internally to coworkers, right? It's something that they feel that they don't need, but we know as a business they do need. And the currency in which we trade in is time, right? They're going to pay us with their time. Is my training going to be worth their time? And so we're constantly measuring. You took this training. Was it a good use of time? I think it's an overlooked question, right? People just want to know, well, did you get the information? I did, but was it a good use of time? Because I'm going to now ask you to do more and more training. And if it was not a good use of time, then you're not going to come back and pay me with it again. And we're going to lose customers. And so are we creating an MVP that's worth that currency? Are we marketing it appropriately? Are we marketing it through the right channels? So a recommendation that I would make to anybody, not just those in L&D, track your clicks, right? You can use Bitly. There's a ton of free link trackers out there. If you're going to send emails with, hey, click here, track that click, right? And then A/B test it against Slack or Teams, whatever it is that you're using. Did we get more clicks via email or did we get it more through Slack? And use that as your marketing tools. A/B test, do all sorts of stuff. Just constantly be thinking about that currency aspect. People are paying us with their time. Do I feel that this is worth their time or even my time to do this?
Love that. The area that I've encouraged our team to focus on as well is we have rating systems
Hmm.
that folks can do once they completed the content and they can't see the rating before they've completed the content, but we track that. And there are times where some of our rating content, we've had to go back. We're only getting 3 out of 5 stars or 2 out of 5 stars. Something's not resonating. And for our regular listeners, you all have heard me say this before. Don't blame the audience if they get up and leave your movie because they don't like it.
Yeah.
As the director, it's important for you to figure out what's going to resonate
Hmm.
with your target audience, get them to stay and enjoy it, not because they're being forced to. And that can be difficult for some folks to navigate, but having that open mindset. So we've talked a lot about orientation, onboarding, tooling. Now, as we start to approach coming in for a landing here in the episode, I'd love to talk about ongoing development. You
Yeah.
got all this high quality talent in the door. How do you develop them? Frame that up for us.
Yeah. So we're going to go all the way back to organizational resiliency, right? How are we building resiliency within the business? And what that is, that's talking to leadership and doing your own research, right? And so you're going to partner very closely with every head, every C suite executive across the business because you're going to want to know, hey, what's coming up on the horizon for you guys, right? So a couple of years ago, talking to our CTO at a company called Komodo Health, AI, right? AI is on the horizon. Okay, great. So that means I need to start developing training to create resiliency within our organization that my engineers have a basic level of understanding around AI. And I worked with him very closely to find content. There wasn't much available back then, but we found what was available and we created programs and pathways within our learning management system and had TED Talks and lunch and learns and all sorts of stuff around that because as a business leader, they saw what was up and coming. You're going to have the same conversations with your head of sales, your CEO. And then where you're really going to get the most information is during those conversations, you're going to ask them who else on their team you should speak to. These are going to be like their right hands, right? Then you're going to do bottom up. You're going to do a survey for the organization or a small beta test, a small beta group of individuals who are super involved in the learning management system. And you can pull that data, people who've attended every single training, or at least 80% of them, right? Like people who are really into growth and development, you're going to survey them and be like, what is on the horizon for you? And you're going to match up the data. So you're going to say, leadership is asking me for all these things, and our individual contributors and our managers are asking us for these things. Where's their alignment? We're going to focus on that right now. And then everything else where there isn't alignment, we're going to take that to the C suite and say, hey, this is what we're hearing from the people within the business around the skills that they believe they need to grow to make sure that we as a business grow, but also to make sure that we stay competitive in the market. What resonates with you? And then we'll go ahead and we'll start building content there. And then again, right? It's partnering with your tech solution. So if you use LinkedIn Learning, ask LinkedIn, hey, what skills are our competitors' employees seeking? They're not going to tell you who the competitors are, but they'll give you an idea and benchmark the landscape. Oh, you're in healthcare tech. Here are what other healthcare tech companies' employees are seeking. You're going to ask other people within your industry through groups, what skills are people looking for? And you're going to start developing content there to ensure that you're building that resiliency over time.
And on the AI front,
Mm-hmm.
have you been leveraging LLMs such as ChatGPT in the development of the content that you have?
Every HR professional needs to. There was a great article, and I know that they're on like everybody's hit list right now, but SHRM released an article a number of months ago about the storm coming around AI. And I think they really hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of people are talking about how AI is going to take our jobs. Fine. Like it will take some of our jobs, just, the assembly line did or whatever. But what we really need to focus on in HR, specifically in learning and development, is how are we training our employees to use AI so that it's effective and that they can go to leadership and say, AI can't do what you think that they do. But what it can do is it can allow me to do the work of one extra person, or it can allow me to take off these administrative burdens so that I can focus on these other things. So, do I use AI in my own work? I do. I'm a team of one. I have to. Do I want to do training on AI across the whole business? Yes, I think that's really where we need to be focusing as a function is we need to start training our employees on how to use AI effectively. But what I will say, the caveat to all this is if you're going to use AI, it's just a robot. It's just a language model. It's not an actual brain. And you need to go through the work that it does, zhuzh it up, and then if you want, you could toss it back into AI and ask it to evaluate itself and its own work. But you can't take it for face value.
It's a great point. And I work at an AI centric company. use LLMs every single day. Some advice I would give to listeners, say to your point, Rory, is you need to check the outputs. LLMs are operating at a college graduate level, but you need to ask it the right thing.
Yep.
And if you all look up things like chain prompting, encouraging an LLM to analyze, fact check its own work, provide multiple drafts, it gives you a better opportunity to have a better output. And I'll ask you two final questions
Sure.
here. When we'll do another hot take.
Okay.
What is an opportunity you feel that L&D leaders have to do better in the next couple of years?
I think it's around AI. I think it's training employees about how to efficiently and effectively use AI, right? How to ask it the right questions, how to source, right? You had some really great comments on AI. I think what a lot of people also miss is you can ask it where it gets its sources from, right? And I think a lot of people miss that opportunity. They take it for face value. But if you're reading something like, this sounds weird, where did you get it? It'll tell you. And there are other systems, right? ChatGPT is not the only one. You can use Perplexity, which gives you the sources up front. And so I think the future of learning and development is ensuring organizations are resilient for the future of AI, and that's training employees on effective usage around AI.
Completely agree. Rory, why did you get into talent development?
Oh, wow. So I wanted to be a teacher. So I set out, I got my master's degree in education. And then when I realized like Dead Poet Society is not real and being Indiana Jones is not really a career path, because as a history teacher, I decided to move on. But what it really was the financial crisis in 2007 that lasted all the way through around like 2009. And schools weren't hiring, but I loved not just teaching, where my real passion was the growing connection between technology and education. So when I was teaching, Twitter had just launched, right? Like dating myself a little bit. So Twitter had just launched and I was looking at Twitter, this could be really cool for educational purposes, right? We could do scavenger hunts with students and all sorts of really interesting things. And just schools were not leveraging technology in any way. Learning management systems in the K through 12 space were like nothing. And so I just set out to see what else I could do with that background, and instructional design, learning and development popped up in a Google search, which was something I legitimately did. I sat at work one day and I typed in education plus technology and jobs into Google. And then I set my path and been there ever since.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Absolutely. It's one of my favorite types of careers that I love to ask how they got into it is L&D, because there's always some inspirational story behind it. And final question for me, likely the easiest. So one, I'd love for you to plug your podcast and where people find that, but how can people get connected with you?
Yeah. So podcast is called Training the Answer. If you are in learning and development, it's definitely for you. We talk with learning and development leaders across all industries about how they have and run effective L&D teams. So if you're just head of HR for a very small company and you've been tasked with L&D, feel free to give us a listen. It may inspire you a little bit to run some offshoot programs. But how you can find me, you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Rory Sacks, RORYSACKS. And that's it. I don't really have any other social media. So,
Rory, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the TroopHR podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. If you would like to learn more about our community, please visit TroopHR.com. In the meantime, keep living the dream.